Lucia Carsuvis teacher here with our weekly episode of this step-by-step on voice. Yeah, sometimes you can think I'm taking a little large voyage too. No, it's quite precise and it's quite what I think it's on point to take as a discussion and a dialogue about our instrument now. So, the environment, what epigenetic? What I mean by that, why I say that, what kind of environment I'm talking about, and especially why epigenetic. Epigenetic, I'm not an expert about. It's one of the fields in which I know less, if I have to say. That's why I'm studying, and in some sort on those episodes I'm studying with you. Some things are my specific and my expertise, yes, of course, but I'm going larger for what we know voice is and what is done, and it's just an opening of the discussion and an opening of the thoughts. And perhaps some of you, and I can also say probably, will know on some subject much more than me. It would be so nice if you think about and leave some comments and correct me or precise me, because as I always say, those episodes has to be useful. Not totally correct, because I know they will not be totally correct, and it will never be correct even where I have an expertise. I can be useful towards something more correct and more appropriate into our path, into better voice, better singing, better playing around with, better satisfaction. So, the environment. The environment can be the internal metabolic environment. It can be the air environment coming into. Yes, if you inhale something that will provoke a reaction, an allergic reaction, you will immediately feel that the environment is giving you another reaction, and there you will acknowledge that it is a dialogue with an environment in which you are. Are we sure that if you don't have an allergic reaction, you are not reacting to the environment? How? What this air is metabolically doing into you, and how you react to this environment of the outside, and then the digestive system. So, how do you react to what you are putting into? That is not exactly into, as I said, for the digestive system, it is now well commonly said that it is an outside of the body passing through ourself. It is a tube in some sort that has the capacities of transforming and then absorbing some of those in a selective way. And as we said, the vagus nerve is an afferent of these digestive organs, and not only the digestive organs, but of this outside world. So this is also an environment to which we react and we have to do about. But also the internal body environment is an environment. And it is changed by many things. Some are leverages that we can do, some others we are predisposed. What it means predisposed? Also there we are starting putting the accent, they are starting putting the accent, we in the sense of human beings and knowledge and science, putting the accent on the fact that the maternal environment in which we develop from an embryo to a fetus and then we come outside has an epigenetic role. Epigenetic role, for what I understand, is that we are activating some gene expression. That can be favorable, and can be less favorable for some things. For example, it looks like the diet and the metabolism of the mother has a say into the gene expression of some tendencies to be more insulin resistant, to be more diabetic, again, it is just to acknowledge, you know, the daily environment. You can call it lifestyle. I'm sitting. Are you sitting? What kind of chair? How much time do you spend there? How do you breathe when you're sitting? How do you move when you're sitting? Do you move sometimes, or are you so much concentrated and taken by other things that your body basically goes into a sort of autonomic state, but meaning that does it have some consequences? Yes, of course. Do you exercise? What kind of exercise do you do? Do you load weights? Do you do weightlifting? Do you go on a bicycle? How do you eat? How your mitochondria are healthy, unhealthy, on the path of being unhealthy? All this is coming into much more refinement into the look, and for more reasons, because for example we know that a constant sympathetic activation without enough of parasympathetic activation can be a risk factor for insulin resistance, since when you've seen the vagus stimulation helps in being insulin sensitive, because we've seen that the sympathetic system is the one that wants you to just go, how can I say, overcome an urgent problem, an urgency, danger, and for this there is a cascade of things. But also if in your life you don't activate the parasympathetic quite enough to balance a lifestyle in which you overactivate the sympathetic, you will come having all these cascades of effects. And in those effects there is also effects into the fascia, the fascial system, into the muscles, how can I say, activation, and especially capacity of the body of turning on the mechanism to do new muscles and to do some muscle sparing activity. For example, the ketogenics diet are often muscle sparing. They are often used now, it is new of the last 5-7 years, into psychiatric disorders, because we are learning that they can be a leverage for some problems that we have, some issues. Also, since they are the biological ingredients of voice and they are also the biological ingredients of body, you have to understand that if you have some gene expression from the womb, or just because we don't know you have this gene expression but you have it, you can leverage to contain a little, at least, from other leverages, as the diet, as the exercise. There are studies that have seen that exercise is fundamental to have an effect on Alzheimer's disease. I don't remember if it was the prevention of Alzheimer's disease or it was a better effect than the drugs. But if you look, you can find easily. It was Max Lugavere who took this study out. It's quite amazing. So for us, lifestyle, yeah, daily environment I prefer, because it's the sum of what you do and the habits you have, and to what you adapt constantly. The study, what repertoire you're choosing to study, what exercises you're choosing to study, which kind of study you do a rotation, do you change them, do you maintain them, why? What age you have, and why you put those kind of studies. You're practicing, yeah, because it's not the same thing. It's like strength and conditioning, the study from my point of view, and practicing it's actually singing. You practice alone, you practice with someone, you practice with what material, How much study, how much practicing? Do you practice with the public? Perhaps you're in a class of conservatory and you have your other colleagues, other students, they are there. You have rehearsals, there is a public, there are people, they pass, it is open, no, it is closed, it's just with your band. How much time you do those practicing and how you structure them. And as I said, public, not public. Do you have gigs? You don't? What kind of gigs? 1 repertoire, 2 repertoire, or what? So, in those kind of things, why epigenetic? Because, I'll let you see some things. Skeletal muscle cells possess a memory of acute early life TNF alpha exposure, role of epigenetic adaptation. Human skeletal muscle possess an epigenetic memory of hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is not only when you become a bodybuilder, but simply when you train a system and you gain some muscle. This is in some sort hypertrophy, because you're getting more muscle than before. And when we train the vocal system, yes, we are getting some hypertrophy somewhere, otherwise we are not training our system, or we are not effective, or we are not really singing. It is the under-singing that can be really bad, or the colloquial voice that never gets artistic. You don't really train, but you're not effective. In my experience, I don't find being effective. Otherwise, there is some sort of hypertrophy. And so, the thing is what? Is that if you have a previous epigenetic, for example, for the example before, you will have to put that into the account of what? Of the environment that you have to deal with. And here, when you do a good training, you can lose and become untrained again. But if you come back to train, you will train in shorter time, and you will have an hypertrophy in shorter time than one who is new to training. Those we called the muscle memory. It's a gene expression. Transcriptional memory in skeletal muscle. Don't forget to exercise. Herein we will review recent progress made in the understanding of how cells can make use of diverse constituents of the epigenetic toolbox to retain a transcriptional memory of past states and perturbations. When you have experience, you can lose a training state, you can be not trained anymore and also in disuse, but you can reactivate with this experience the pattern before. That's why if you train correctly, when you start singing and when you start training, I'm a great advisor for early high-level training. In the middle part, when you are consolidating what you've learned, you can have less high level. I'm absolutely for the fact that it's not common knowledge and it's not commonly thought and commonly used like that. The first trainers you have must be the highest level you can find. So you will have a good gene expression and epigenetic activation of what? For now, for the skeletal muscle, but we will see that it's not only for the skeletal muscles. Or perhaps the skeletal muscles are not only the dumb biomechanics that we think. Physical activity and DNA methylation in humans. Physical activity is a strong stimulus influencing the overall physiology of the human body. Exercises lead to biochemical changes in various tissues. You know, when I say we have to know how to train, because it's not just that we are going to be from disuse to trained, but we have a cascade of adaptations that are biochemical, that are metabolic, that change a lot of the environment, not only of the muscles, but of the tendons, of the fascia, of the nervous system, and now today it's in the epigenetic. So, exercises lead to biochemical changes in various tissues and exert an impact on gene expression. Exercise-induced changes in gene expression may be mediated by epigenetic modifications, which rearrange the chromatin structure, I have no idea, sorry, and therefore modulate its accessibility for transcription factors. So, practically, they are saying not only you get trained and you change your tissues, you change your gene expression, and it looks like, but what I've studied a bit, that can remain into a memory, meaning you can get back to access to it or to going on to more sophisticated gene expression after. From this book again, The Complexity of Greatness, and from this chapter of Wendy Johnson, the pervasiveness of differences in gene expression and the sensitivity of gene expression to environmental stimuli at both external and internal levels place a premium on the importance of development. There are two basic ways in which this is true. First, much but not all of the development of an individual human, along with that of every other organism, takes place in a regular sequence of changes in genetic expression. Again, it's a dynamic thing. It's not fixed for forever. And the studies they are doing now here in artistic expression and greatness and creativity, we see that gene expression is very important. What we call talent. Is it something that you are born with? Or is it something that you are born with and the environment is going to activate? The environment can be before birth, it can be after birth, but it can be even later. If you look again, Huberman Lab, that is the Andrew Huberman podcast, he has very specific advices and knowledge and how can I say, practices to get what we call the neuroplasticity, that sometimes we want, sometimes no. But when we want, it is when we have to learn something or relearn something or correct something that we have learned badly or for which we have not the epigenetic correct expression and activation. There are some practices that we have to do, and traditionally in traditional training practices of musicians for voice, for piano, for violin, we find those types. But look at him, because if you have a classical training, you have found those traditional practices and you can understand some of their weight and their wisdom into getting to learn really, and some other things that were just of an old style and an old way of thinking of human beings. Get to Huberman Lab so you can also strategize for your learning better into those elements and into what exercises, studying, etc. are tools to put into these strategies. So I was there. The fact that it's gene expression that changes means that some form of internal or external environmental trigger sets or does not the gene expression in motion and stops it or does not when it is complete. This can create permanent effects that we would recognize as traits, as when secondary sex characteristics emerge during puberty. But it also can create temporary changes that can take place at any point during the lifespan and may recur or not many times throughout the lifespan, as when the immune system responds to infection. So again, we have to see if we want permanent or not. And those also our strategies can differ. And it is quite important, and this page that I put here is always in the same chapter. I hope Wendy Johnson will not have a problem. She's amazing, and you can purchase the book because all the chapter is fantastic and all the book is really very interesting. Oh, I can say fundamental. To understand how it operates, it is important to recognize that the environment is inside as well as outside the organism, as we were saying. We tend to think first of the environment as separate and distinct from the organism. We could lift the organism out of its environment and set it down in some other environment, but any movement toward or away from any such external environmental circumstance and any accommodation to it must be detected and processed by some cells within the organism, and this processing alters the internal environment for other cells, thus possibly changing the way they function as well. As we always say, to every action we have a reaction. So, if we want to adapt to an environment, we have to adapt internally. Otherwise, we will not adapt. And also, we have to recognize the change of the environment. We have to dialogue with it. How? Again, by changing the internal environment. The autonomous nervous system works like that. It works by hormones, by molecules. And it activates what? It activates the adaptation that it wants into the body. You want more restricted and tense vessels. It is the sympathetic. So it changes internally. That's why we have to take care. Because we want to get into a balanced system at the end of the day and an appropriate system for our function. When we sing, we activate the sympathetic system, otherwise we can't sing because we want the energy and the adrenaline to do that huge thing that, as Miley Cyrus says, we must be crazy to do that. Yes, we must be crazy. I thought the same. And if you sing with public, you know that it's exactly the same. We must be really pretty crazy to do that. But we tap into the parasympathetic system so that we are going to pay a price. How much? If you're smart, not that much and not much more than any meaningful life. Because we activate the sympathetic, we activate the parasympathetic to sing, we stop the concert and we are completely plenty of adrenaline that we don't want to sleep, etc. And when we have enough experience, or we have someone that help us in that, in some sort, we manage to do a top-down, so that we can sleep after, not 3 days after. Otherwise, every concert we stay 3 days without sleeping, and it can become really a huge problem, because we can get into some access into the brain, into the mood, into the nervous system. It can imbalance everything, and those are things for which we can leverage some way. Again, Huberman Lab, because we can leverage not only by the parasympathetic and topping down, but also by the light, the exercise, the diet, etc. And later here it talks about the fact that genes operate in networks that have emergent properties of their own beyond the one-on-one effect of each individual gene. And also that the body goes by redundancy. So we can activate the same functions with different nodes of genes, which are collections of genes. And she says that here. We are learning that these networks tend to have characteristic properties that make this possible. The network consists of collections of genes or nodes that maintain connections across which they transact with each other. The extents of these connections are not random, so there is no number of them that is node typical. Many nodes have very few connections, but a few nodes are central and have connections to many other central nodes. When something alters the function of a centrally connected gene, it can have multiple ramifications across many structural and metabolic systems. In contrast, have profound effects on other, and as we say, in cascade, or if you would prefer, in network, by working on some central. And here we come into this book that is for vocalists. You can purchase it also because it's very interesting, it's pretty complete. Application of motor learning principles to voice training, because it has to do together. Motor learning is defined by Schmidt and Lee, 2010, as a set of processes associated with practice or experience leading to relatively permanent changes in the capability for movement. We have the muscular changes, we have the neuronal changes, we have the gene expression changes. Motor learning is not something we can always see or observe. More importantly, level of performance during skill acquisition does not necessarily reflect degree of learning that has taken place. And this you have to remember. You have to remember. Second part, the forgetting hypothesis. Let's return to the concept that we want to set up our students to make errors in order to maximize motor learning. Errors, failures, yes, not always, not all the time, not only, but a lot. The forgetting hypothesis endorses the notion that by producing non-sequential random repetitions of various motor skills, the learner is forced to generate or retrieve a new motor paradigm for each new skill. For example, skipping from skill A to B to C back to skill A keeps the brain from going on autopilot by repeating one skill over and over in a closed loop. Performance will indeed improve with uninterrupted repetition, but only by virtue of the repetition, not because of the learning. And it is what is called the blocked practice, opposed to the random practice. So what we know now, that what we call talent is partially a gene's expression. That this gene expression can have different environments in which can be activated for the same thing. So we go by redundancy. What it means that we can have different settings of study, of environment, of public, not public, and get to the same level of artistry, of our specific artistry and talent. So it tells one thing, for example, that perfectionism doesn't work, because perfectionism wants one optimal environment that is the only one, and it doesn't want errors. And we said we learn by errors. Only by errors? No. And this is the thing that for athletes it starts being pretty well organized, all that. Michael Boy is an example, Movements as Medicine is an example. Look at his video, because they say exactly the same thing that she says for vocal learning, because it's a motor learning still. And it is, the learning can look messy. But if you strategize correctly, it will get to a higher level than the blocked practice that works just on simple abilities, but not into the complex, that is, what we want and what usually we use as a simple ability. It is always in context. And the most talented and the higher crafts and artistry you have by complexity, not by ability. So, what they say for athletes, Michael Boyce said something very important. He said, you want a team, because for athletes they can play basically weekly, and in some societies, in some cultures and in some conditions, singers have access to that. In some other conditions they don't. It is something that Måneskin said for Italy, for example. You don't have access to places in which play live. If you're good, you have to have your public and you have to bring your public. So to learn and to practice your craft, it's quite a problem. They did on the street. They went on the street practicing. Why? To have a public. Why? To manipulate the environment, to be a favorable environment for what they wanted. We can manipulate the environment. We can create conditions to basically train and stay into the favorable environment by making leverage on those elements. For example, the daily environment. You have a daily job or you stay at school all day sitting. When you have a pause, when you ask to go to the bathroom, you move and you activate your parasympathetic for some moments by doing little things like that. You do a breath work as Huberman or someone else, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. You do 2 minutes of meditation every 2 hours, something like that. It will change enormously. You decided that, as I teach to my students, some of you will say, no, my God, she asked to imitate. No, putting context is useful. You take a concert of a voice that is not too far from where you want to go, and it's not too far from where you are now. You take a live concert, if possible at the level of experience at which you are, meaning if you are not a professional singer, someone who is quite young before being renowned or in the first part of the career, and you make the backing vocals for, even if you are learning the concert and all the songs, and you do that from the starting of the concert, first song, and you go for 15 minutes, yeah, and then you stop. Then next day, or when you can, first song, because usually if they start with a song, it's a good song to start the concert, first song, and then you start from the part where you stopped, the 15 minutes, for other 12 minutes if the first, so it's 15 minutes every time. And you go on. You're not imitating. You're using the singer to learn some gestures that he does and that you have not clearly understood, because we have mirror neurons that are able to bring you on the path of. So if you stay in a place in which you can't sing, you don't have possibilities, this can be one of the ways. One of the ways. And also, for my students, I always say, you have your repertoire, okay, but then you have to exercise the opposite. Well, in some repertoire you will never sing in the public. When I used to sing, I used to do what? To do some very, very, can I say, some pieces I would never sing, not for another classification of voice, even if I studied some vocalizations for light soprano, without asking me to make them come correct, because otherwise I would have asked my voice to get where couldn't, but just to activate some gestures that are something inside me told me you can need them. And by that I learned to have some refinement in the voice production that was very useful to be more nuanced into the repertoire that I loved. So the environment is not something that is fixed and you have to be submitted to. It's something you can manipulate. It's something you can create. When I used, for example, for Chloe to get into my Instagram, it was, okay, how can I put a little pressure on her and giving us a little music? We make her get public on my Instagram. Is it a high performance? Doesn't need. She's learning and learning getting much higher than where her performance looks like. So the thing is, when we are going to see the programs and the strategies and the practices, have a look that we want to have an environment that is the environment you need in that moment, that must be slightly superior to what your capacities are, not so far and so much superior that you cannot adapt. What it means you cannot adapt? You are not going to learn. Because you are not only failing, you are failing in failing. Meaning it's too difficult for your system and it will not have the favorable adaptations because you simply don't understand a level that is too complex. That's why even if you have a great talent, you have to put into the condition for which he is ready. Slightly more difficult. And then sometimes a little more difficult and more challenging for a shorter period of time, but into an environment that is very nice and not, how can I say, performance oriented. So that it can access to the knowledge of others into an environment that is too high level for the student, but not so, how can I say, it gets to inspiration more than learning. Because it's an environment in which it doesn't matter the level of the student in that moment. It just matters that it can stay there for a little. I can have great inspiration, as Viola Davis says of the inspiration she had seeing
Viola's salvation came from an unlikely source: television. As a young girl, she saw Cicely Tyson's iconic performance in the autobiography of Miss Jane.
On television, the artistry she was moved by. And she decided that, and she saw, and she had a mirroring experience in which she said, wow, this can be something, yeah. But it's not for daily use, this. Because you will not learn if it's too far. So it's an epigenetic. We create conditions to stimulate an epigenetic. And those conditions can be different. Quite different. Not only one. So you can create the conditions and the environment in which you can adapt better to get to you. And the fact that it's epigenetic is the fact that you don't realize you're learning. You don't realize you're learning at a certain moment. Wow. You're different. And then you create another environment. And our strategies are very often to create those environments. Not the abilities. Not the blocked. Even if sometimes can seem a bit, I'm not so sure if I'm learning something. Yeah, I'm learning something. And some professional can say that, but there must be those who know that we learn in this random environment and can see the more complex things we are activating. And now the recap.